Happy Monday, everyone. We're going to try to do a little more sermon scraps now that we're jumping back into Revelation with me being gone this summer. I just didn't want to add more things to my plate and just being in and out so much this summer. Thought it would be more productive to spend my time on other things. But now that we're jumping back into Revelation, there's all sorts of things that I'm having to leave out in my prep each week. So look for these to be more regular this fall. So yesterday we went through Revelation 14, at least the beginning, up through verse 13. We saw the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and then three angels flying overhead. We'll finish up Revelation 14 this next week. But I begin by just talking about some biblical theological themes that I picked up from the Exodus that I think John is alluding back to within this. And it's really important for us to understand Revelation correctly, to understand some of the Old Testament themes, allusions, and references that John is making. Another one that I didn't even talk about yesterday, there's so much that I can't always cover everything that I'm learning or studying in my preparation each week. But in verse 4, it talks about the first fruits. They were redeemed from humanity as the first fruits for God and the Lamb. Now, one of the authors that I read, D.A. Carson, he talked about a better translation of that word is not first fruits, it's actually an offering to God, and that's what the Septuagint translates a lot of the older passages. So like when we think of first fruits, it's often like the very first thing that comes as a precursor to what's coming next. But what he's saying is a better translation of that word is an ongoing offering to God, similar to Romans 12:1 and 2, offer your bodies to God as a living sacrifice. But if you're following that first fruits theme or idea, that's actually another touch point connection back to Exodus. So in Exodus 34:26, it talks about bringing your first fruits and offering them up to God. But what's interesting, I think this is a really cool switch that John makes, is where in Exodus you bring your first fruits to God. In Revelation, we are the first fruits to God. So the whole sacrificial system has changed. It's now through Jesus. And once we come through Jesus, then we're able to be the first fruits, not have to bring our first fruits to him. So I just thought that was a really cool touch point for us to consider together. Another one, and so I mentioned, I think that the Mount Zion that's being referred to here. So verse 1 says, I looked, there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. So there's some debate whether or not this is referring to a earthly place or a heavenly place. So a couple passages that pushed me to, in addition to like the final clincher for me was that every other instance that the Lamb is referred to, it's heaven. But a couple passages in the New Testament that point me in this direction as well. Hebrews 12:22 says, instead, you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to myriads of angels, a festive gathering. That's one of the touch points that I would argue points us in the direction that this is a heavenly reference. There's also Galatians 4:26, where Paul's actually doing some biblical theology here, where he's picking up some themes and ideas from the Old Testament and talking about how they find their fulfillment now in the New Testament. So he says, starting in verse 25, Hagar represents Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above, the heavenly Jerusalem, as some translations have there, is free, and she is our mother. So again, this idea is there's going to be a heavenly reality, a heavenly Mount Zion that we're going to be coming to. Now, one of the things that I've just learned as I'm digging into Revelation over these number of months now is in order to correctly interpret Revelation, we have to do biblical theology. John's not just given a vision of exclusively future events. He's actually talking about repeated themes. I've shared this idea of recapitulation. That is a reimagining, reinvigorating, verbalizing some of the things that have happened in the past. And so we need to know our Bibles incredibly well in order to understand and interpret Revelation correctly. But on top of that, we also need to do very careful exegesis. So as I was studying this past week, what I read about those arguing that this is an earthly Jerusalem, referring to a specific time period right before Jesus returns, appeal to two passages, Psalm 2 and Isaiah 24. Now, again, there are a lot of Old Testament references and allusions in here, but I sometimes worry that the way that we have been trained to do biblical theology is almost like overly narrow, where we will pick a word, rip it out of whatever context we're in, and then use like Strong's Concordance to find out what other passages in the Bible it's used in, and then assume that that word is being used exactly the same in all the other passages. And I think that's a mistake for us to make. One of the primary rules that I was trained in initial exegesis, so that is careful study of the text, is you need to start with slower sections before you go out further and further. So you need to start looking for close context, that is like within the few verses. Then you'll go out from there to the chapter. You'll go from there to the book. You'll go from there to any other books that the author has written. Then you will go to the New Testament, and then you will go to the Old Testament. Don't just jump from New Testament directly back to Old Testament, because that often misses, first of all, just thousands of years of history, but also many ways that language and ideas and thoughts change. The other thing I just want to note in this is we cannot throw out all the rules of interpretation when we get to Revelation. Like it's fascinating to me that so many people have such good hermeneutical impulses until you get to Revelation. One of the number one rules I was taught in my basic introduction to biblical study class was the text cannot mean today what it didn't mean back then. Now, we might have a fuller or a more fleshed out interpretation today because we can look back and see things a little bit differently than they could have in the first century. But remember that these books have a specific audience and time and place. These texts were not primarily written to us. They were written for us, but they're not written directly to us. So that's my spiel on a biblical theology here. I just want to share. I thought this was kind of funny. I thought this idea was it just really stood out to me this week. This following the Lamb wherever he goes in verse 4. I had just like a vision in my mind, thinking of that idea of like a little kid that keeps following and badgering an adult. Like if you ever seen the movie Up, that's kind of Russell and Carl. That's kind of the image that I have of following the Lamb wherever he goes, of just question after question after question after question, and Jesus actually invites that in our lives. Like we can't annoy God. That's just an amazing thing. Like God always wants us to spend time with him and engage with him, and we can't wear him out. There's another one, the verse 6. This was just an interesting thing. It says, I saw another angel flying high overhead with the eternal gospel. This terminology of high overhead, the literal words that John is using there is middle heaven. It's referring to basically the sky from like the ground up to space, essentially. So this in-between place between earth and heaven. And that's where the angel is running around flying. Now, an important thing to note about this is angels are messengers. The Greek word for angel is just referring to someone who is a messenger. So when we share the news of the eternal gospel with others, we are actually joining with the angels in proclaiming the eternal gospel. I just think that's a beautiful picture that kind of shifts or should give us more zeal and enthusiasm with our evangelism, because it's not us just going off and doing it by ourselves. We're joining with the angels, the other servants of God, in proclaiming this eternal gospel. The last thing is there's some difficult things in here related to hell and eternal suffering, and there's more that could have been said about annihilationism. I tried to keep it more short and condensed, so if you want any more resources on that, please feel free to reach out to me and I can send you some articles. I've got some books on that resource that I think are worth for us to at least dialogue on. Not something to take lightly or haphazardly, but it is a reality that we need to be aware of and not pretend that these things are not in the text of Scripture. So those are my extra thoughts on Revelation 14. I hope you guys are starting off well on this week, and we will continue. Don't forget, classes have started this past week. So we have Echoes of Faith, which is studying church history. We have Habits of the Household, which is a parenting class. And then we'll also be starting a Art of Marriage class. So if all of those will be at 9 o'clock this next week. So I'd love to see you participate in those. And apart from that, we will continue in Revelation on Sunday morning, and I look forward to seeing you then.